Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
That opening boulder chase didn't just launch 1,000 adventure movies. It launched an entire generation's understanding of what cinema could be when someone combined Saturday morning serials with a budget big enough to make magic real. Raiders of the Lost Ark hit theaters on June 12, 1981, and immediately rewrote the rulebook on adventure films. Indiana Jones was an archaeology professor who punched Nazis, feared snakes, and treated priceless artifacts like they were designed to be broken. Harrison Ford brought weathered authenticity. Karen Allen matched him as Marion Ravenwood, the whiskey-drinking ex who could outdrink anyone. Paul Freeman's Belloc was everything Indy could have become if he'd chosen wrong. Directed by Steven Spielberg from a George Lucas story, Raiders cost $20 million, earned $389 million worldwide, won 5 Oscars, and turned fedoras into a lifestyle. Behind the adventure was chaos, illness, and improvisation. Before we dive in, be sure to like and subscribe because it genuinely helps the channel grow. Now, let's crack open 15 wild facts about Raiders, starting with number 15. Fact number 15, Tom Selleck was Indiana Jones. Until a mustache destroyed everything. Before Harrison Ford ever touched a bullwhip, Indiana Jones belonged to Tom Selleck. Not in theory, in actual signed contracts. Selleck had been cast, done costume tests, learned to use the whip, and was ready to start filming when CBS decided to destroy his movie career over a detective show. Selleck had committed to a TV pilot called Magnum P.I. before Raiders came along. When Spielberg offered him Indiana Jones, Selleck went to CBS asking for a release from his contract. The network said no. Selleck pushed. CBS pushed back harder. They could have been flexible, could have worked around the shooting schedule, but they refused purely because they could. Raiders couldn't wait. Production was scheduled, locations were booked, and Spielberg needed his leading man immediately. Selleck had to walk away from one of cinema's most iconic roles to honor a contract for a show that hadn't even been greenlit yet. He filmed the Magnum pilot, then sat around for months wondering if he'd sacrificed a Spielberg movie for nothing. Here's the twist. Magnum P.I. got picked up, ran for 8 seasons, and made Selleck a massive star. He became a household name, earned Emmy nominations, and built a career that's lasted decades. Meanwhile, Harrison Ford became Indiana Jones, revitalized his post-Star Wars career, and created another iconic character. Both men won. Selleck got his legacy, Ford got his, and somewhere at CBS, an executive congratulated themselves for accidentally creating 2 stars instead of 1. But Ford almost wasn't even the backup plan. Fact number 14. George Lucas hid R2-D2 and C3PO in the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. George Lucas couldn't resist leaving his mark on Raiders, even if it meant committing archaeological blasphemy. Hidden in the Well of Souls scene, carved into the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics on the temple walls, are images of R2-D2 and C3PO. Yes, Star Wars droids. In an Egyptian tomb, from thousands of years ago. The Easter egg appears during the scene where Indy and Salah are lowering the Ark. If you pause and look carefully at the pillar behind them, there's a section of hieroglyphics that clearly depicts the 2 droids among the traditional Egyptian symbols. It's visible for less than a second during normal playback, which is exactly how Lucas wanted it. This wasn't an accident or a joke by a rogue set designer. Lucas specifically requested that the production design team include the droids as a hidden gag.
An easy-to-tell story of those stories. The Force basically came from, distilling all of the...
The hieroglyphics were hand-carved into the set pieces, meaning someone spent hours meticulously creating fake ancient Egyptian art just to hide a Star Wars reference that 99% of audiences would never notice. When fans eventually discovered it years later through freeze-frame VHS analysis, Lucas acted surprised, but admitted he'd planted it deliberately. His reasoning? If Star Wars took place a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, then technically the droids existed before ancient Egypt. Therefore, it made perfect sense for them to appear in Raiders. The logic is absurd, but somehow very George Lucas. Here's the beautiful part. The Easter egg that was supposed to be a throwaway inside joke became a treasure hunt for fans. Fact number 13. The famous boulder was made of fiberglass and still nearly ended Ford. The boulder chase is Raiders' signature opening sequence. Indiana Jones sprints through a collapsing temple, while a massive stone sphere rolls after him, gaining speed, threatening to crush him flat. It's pure cinematic perfection, and it was also genuinely dangerous, despite being completely fake. The boulder wasn't stone. It was fiberglass and plaster, built to be light enough that it wouldn't actually crush Harrison Ford if something went wrong. The prop department constructed it in pieces that could be reassembled on location, painted it to look like ancient weathered rock, and mounted it on a track system that would control its speed. Except the track system didn't work as planned. During filming, the boulder rolled faster than expected, caught up to Ford quicker than rehearsed, and nearly flattened him for real. Ford had to genuinely sprint, genuinely panic, and pray the thing stayed on its rails. The fear you see on his face isn't acting. It's a man realizing he's being chased by several hundred pounds of movie prop that's moving way too fast. They got the shot in 3 takes. The second take looked best. That's the one in the film, and Ford's terror is absolutely real. Here's what makes it perfect. The sequence that launched 1,000 imitations and became shorthand for adventure cinema was the result of a technical malfunction and an actor genuinely running for his life. The most iconic moment in the film exists because the safety measures failed just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be lethal. Fact number 12. Harrison Ford had dysentery during the sword fight scene. The Cairo swordsman scene is one of cinema's most famous improvised moments. A skilled fighter spins his sword with elaborate flourishes, clearly preparing for an extended duel. Indy watches for about 3 seconds, pulls out his gun, and shoots him. Cut. Perfect. Except it was supposed to be a 5-minute whip versus sword, choreographed fight sequence. Harrison Ford had been violently ill for days. Tunisia's food and water had wreaked havoc on his digestive system, and by the time they got to this scene, Ford could barely stand upright without needing a bathroom. The elaborate fight Spielberg had planned required energy Ford simply didn't have. Between takes, Ford approached Spielberg with a proposal. What if Indy just shot the guy? It would be funny, it would be in character, and more importantly, it would let Ford finish the scene and get back to lying down somewhere near medical supplies. Spielberg loved it. They told Terry Richards, the stuntman playing the swordsman, about the change. Richards had spent weeks training with the sword, perfecting those flourishes, preparing for the big fight sequence that would showcase his skills. Instead, he got to spin the sword for 3 seconds before getting shot. He took it well, all things considered. Here's the beautiful irony. Ford's illness created one of the film's most memorable moments and spawned countless parodies. The fight that never happened became more famous than most of the fights that did. Fact number 11. The snakes were real and there weren't enough of them. The Well of Souls needed to be filled with snakes, thousands of them. Enough to make audiences genuinely uncomfortable and make Indiana Jones's ophidiophobia feel justified. The production crew ordered every snake they could find from snake handlers across Europe and North Africa. They got about 2,000. It wasn't enough. What you see in the Well of Souls is 2,000 real snakes supplemented by thousands of fake ones. But here's the problem. Fake snakes look fake when they're not moving. So the crew had to strategically place real snakes among the fake ones, hoping the real ones would move enough to make the whole mass seem alive. It didn't really work. Spielberg knew the scene felt flat, so they added more snakes. They cut up garden hoses, painted them, and scattered them throughout. They made rubber snakes and wound them around everything, and crucially, they added a sheet of glass between Harrison Ford and the actual live snakes for most of the shots, letting them layer the real snake footage over Ford's performance. The snake that crawls up Indy's back, real. Ford's absolute terror, real. The actor who famously hates snakes spent days filming in a pit with thousands of serpents, both real and fake, never quite sure which was which. Here's the payoff. The scene that makes everyone squirm, that makes Indy's fear relatable and visceral, is a massive optical illusion. Rubber, glass, and camera tricks combined with Ford's genuine phobia to create nightmare fuel. Fact number 10. Harrison Ford tore his knee ligament and kept filming through the pain. During the truck chase sequence, Harrison Ford didn't just risk his life doing his own stunts. He actually injured himself badly enough that it should have shut down production, then kept working anyway because stopping wasn't an option. The injury happened during one of the many takes where Ford had to jump, roll, and drag himself along the ground while the truck barrels forward. His knee twisted wrong during a landing, and he felt something tear, not pull, tear. The kind of injury that makes your entire leg stop working the way it's supposed to. Ford didn't tell anyone immediately. He finished the take, called cut, and limped off to the side. A medic examined him and confirmed what Ford already knew. He'd torn a ligament in his knee. The medic recommended Ford stop filming immediately and get proper medical treatment. Ford refused. They were in the middle of the desert. The truck sequence was half finished, and shutting down would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and potentially derail the entire production schedule. So, Ford had the medic tape his knee as tightly as possible, took some pain medication, and went back to work. If you watch the film knowing this, you can see it. Indy's limp in several scenes isn't character work. It's Ford genuinely unable to put full weight on his injured leg. The grimaces of pain are real. The careful way he moves in certain shots is Ford protecting a torn ligament while pretending to be an action hero. Here's the painful irony. Ford's injury made Indy seem more human, more vulnerable. The limp that should have stopped production became part of the character's authenticity. Fact number 9. Ford refused a stunt double for the truck drag and nearly got crushed. The sequence where Indy gets dragged under the Nazi truck isn't just one of the most famous stunts in cinema history. It's also one of the most dangerous, and Harrison Ford insisted on doing it himself, despite everyone begging him not to. The stunt required the actor to be dragged along the ground beneath a moving truck, holding on to the undercarriage while dirt and debris flew into his face, then pulling himself up the side while the vehicle maintained speed. Stunt coordinator Glenn Randall had a professional stunt performer ready to do it. Ford said no. Ford argued that the close-up shots needed to be him, not a double, and that cutting between Ford's face and a stunt performer's body would break the illusion. Spielberg was skeptical, but agreed to let Ford try, with strict safety protocols in place. The truck was rigged with special grips and handholds. The ground was cleared of major rocks. Ford was wearing protective padding under his costume, and they rehearsed the sequence a dozen times at slow speed before attempting it for real. When they actually filmed it, everything that could go wrong nearly did. Ford's grip slipped twice. Dirt got in his eyes and temporarily blinded him. The truck hit an unexpected bump that nearly threw him off. But he held on, completed the stunt, and gave Spielberg the shot he wanted. Here's the reckless perfection of it. One of cinema's most iconic action sequences exists because an actor refused to let someone else do the dangerous work. Ford's commitment to doing his own stunts created authenticity that audiences feel even if they don't consciously recognize it. Fact number 8. A fly flew into Paul Freeman's mouth and he just kept acting. During the argument scene in the Cairo excavation site, Paul Freeman delivers an intense monologue as Belloc. He's threatening Indy, explaining his philosophy, building tension with every word. And right in the middle of a crucial line, a fly lands on his face, crawls across his cheek, and flies directly into his mouth. Freeman doesn't flinch, doesn't break character, doesn't stop the take. He keeps delivering the dialogue, swallows, and continues the scene like nothing happened. It's visible in the final cut if you know where to look, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The crew noticed immediately. Half expected Spielberg to yell, "Cut." Spielberg kept the cameras rolling because Freeman's performance was too good to interrupt over a fly. When the take ended, there was a moment of silence before everyone started laughing. Freeman calmly asked if they needed another take. Spielberg said no, that one was perfect. The fly became legendary among the cast and crew. Freeman later joked in interviews that the fly was method acting, fully committed to making Belloc seem unbothered by minor inconveniences. Some fans have turned it into a whole theory about Belloc's character being so focused and intense that nothing breaks his concentration. Here's the beautiful part. An unplanned moment of pure gross happenstance became a testament to Freeman's professionalism and Spielberg's trust in his actors. The take with the fly is the one in the movie because sometimes the best performances include unexpected protein, but some moments were planned chaos. Fact number 7. The truck chase used 2 different trucks and nobody can tell. The sequence where Indy gets dragged under the truck, crawls along the underside, and pulls himself back up is one of cinema's most famous stunts. What looks like one continuous action sequence was actually filmed with 2 completely different trucks that don't match if you look closely. The production started with a German transport truck they'd sourced in Tunisia, perfect for the Nazi convoy aesthetic. But during the first day of stunt filming, the original truck's suspension couldn't handle the weight and stress of the stunt rigging. The undercarriage started failing, making it genuinely dangerous for the stunt work. They needed a replacement immediately. The production scrambled to find another military transport truck in Tunisia that could handle the stunts. They found one, but it was a slightly different model with different dimensions and markings. The production painted it to match as closely as possible and hoped audiences wouldn't notice the switch. If you watch carefully, the truck in the wide shots has slightly different side panels than the truck in the close-ups. The headlights don't quite match. The dirt patterns change between angles. But during the kinetic energy of the chase sequence, your brain doesn't register the discrepancies. Here's the magic. One of the most seamless action sequences in cinema history is actually 2 different vehicles edited together through pure directorial sleight of hand. The continuity error that should have been obvious is invisible because Spielberg understood that momentum and excitement override logic. Fact number 6. Karen Allen did her own drinking scene and actually got tipsy. The drinking contest between Marion and the Mongolian Sherpa in the Raven Bar wasn't supposed to be method acting, but Karen Allen decided to commit fully to authenticity. The scene required her to match a much larger man, drink for drink, downing shot after shot, while maintaining perfect composure until her opponent collapsed. The prop department offered Allen colored water or weak tea for the close-up shots where the liquid is visible. Allen refused. She wanted to use actual alcohol, arguing that real whiskey would give her performance authentic weight. Spielberg was skeptical, but agreed to let her try one take with real liquor. They loaded the shot glasses with actual whiskey. Not full strength, they diluted it slightly, but it was real alcohol. Allen proceeded to film the sequence, downing multiple shots over several takes to get the angles and coverage Spielberg wanted. By the end of the shooting, Allen was genuinely feeling the effects. Her slightly glassy eyes and deliberate movements in the later part of the scene aren't acting. That's an actress who committed to the bit and paid the price. The take where she slams down the final glass with particular authority, that was Allen's real frustration at being tipsy on set. Here's the perfect irony. Allen's decision to drink real alcohol for authenticity meant she had to film the rest of her scenes that day while slightly impaired, making everything more difficult. The professionalism that drove her to use real whiskey created genuine unprofessionalism. Sometimes dedication creates its own problems. And speaking of problems, one location nearly ended production. Fact number 5, Tunisia's heat hospitalized half the crew, including Spielberg. Tunisia in summer is brutally hot.
Terrifying ordeal. It took something like 45 minutes from the moment the first shots were fired on.
The production scheduled their desert shooting for June and July, when temperatures regularly exceeded 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Within the first week, the production faced a medical crisis that nearly shut down filming entirely. Spielberg himself got sick first. Food poisoning from local cuisine hit him so hard he was bedridden for 3 days, directing some scenes from a cot via radio, while his assistant directors handled the on-set blocking. He lost 15 pounds during production, and later said he barely remembers filming certain sequences because he was delirious with fever. Harrison Ford, as documented, had dysentery that lasted most of the Tunisia shoot. Karen Allen got severe heat exhaustion twice. John Rhys Davies, wearing the heavy Sala costume in triple-digit heat, collapsed on set and had to be cooled down with ice packs. At one point, over half the crew was either sick or recovering from illness. The only person who seemed immune was stunt coordinator Glenn Randall, who'd worked in desert conditions before and knew how to pace himself. Randall became the unofficial health monitor, forcing crew members to drink water and take breaks whether they wanted to or not. Here's the grim achievement: Raiders of the Lost Ark. one of the most beloved adventure films ever made, was shot by a crew that was collectively falling apart from heat, illness, and exhaustion. Every desert scene represents someone suffering through genuine physical misery to capture movie magic. The adventure that looks effortless on screen was agony behind the camera. Fact number 4. The map room scene was shot in one morning because the sun wouldn't cooperate. The map room sequence is Raiders' quietest, most contemplative moment. Indy uses the medallion and the staff of Ra to find the Ark's location as sunlight streams through the chamber. It's beautiful, meditative, and the result of Spielberg racing against time and astronomy. The scene required specific lighting, a single beam of sunlight hitting the medallion at the staff's tip at exactly the right angle to create the reflection that reveals the Ark's location. This meant shooting during a very specific window when the sun's position matched what the scene required. In Tunisia, in summer, that window was approximately 45 minutes long. Spielberg had one morning to get it right. One shot at the precise lighting. If they missed it, they'd have to wait until the next day when the sun returned to the same position, wasting an entire day of production on his already tight schedule. The crew rehearsed the night before, marking positions, timing movements, preparing every possible element. When morning came, they had their 45-minute window. Spielberg shot the sequence in pieces, racing the sun's movement across the sky, knowing every minute brought them closer to losing the light. They finished with less than 5 minutes to spare. The scene that feels timeless and unhurried was captured in frantic haste before the sun moved and ruined everything. Here's the poetry in that. Raiders' most peaceful moment, the one that feels like Indy finally getting to be an archaeologist instead of an action hero, was filmed in absolute chaos. The illusion of calm required maximum stress. Fact number 3. The entire opening sequence was an afterthought added late in production. The temple opening with the golden idol, the deadly traps, the betrayal, and the boulder chase is one of the most famous openings in cinema history. It establishes everything you need to know about Indiana Jones in under 10 minutes. His skills, his ethics, his luck, his enemies. It's perfect. It was also never supposed to exist. Lawrence Kasdan's original script started with Indy already in Nepal, looking for Marion. The backstory about his previous adventures was referenced in dialogue, but never shown. Spielberg and Lucas read the script and felt something was missing. They wanted to throw audiences directly into the action, show who Indy was before telling them. So they invented the temple sequence specifically as a cold open. Kasdan wrote it in about a week, borrowing from unused ideas Lucas had developed for other projects. The production scheduled it as one of the final sequences to shoot, after they had already captured most of the film. The temple interior was built on a soundstage in England. The exterior jungle shots were filmed in Hawaii. The massive boulder was constructed specifically for this sequence that hadn't existed in the original screenplay. Spielberg shot it in just under 2 weeks, treating it as a standalone short film that happened to star the same characters. Here's the incredible part. The sequence that defines Raiders of the Lost Ark, that every film school analyzes as perfect action filmmaking, was a late addition rushed into production because the filmmakers realized their opening wasn't exciting enough. Fact number 2. Alfred Molina's film debut ended with him covered in tarantulas. The guide who betrays Indy in the temple opening, grabs the golden idol, and gets killed by the booby traps is played by Alfred Molina in his very first film role. He was 27 years old, fresh out of drama school, and absolutely terrified of spiders. The script called for Molina's character, Satipo, to be covered in tarantulas during the spider trap sequence. Molina, desperate to make a good impression in his first movie job, didn't mention his arachnophobia during the audition. He figured they'd use fake spiders. They didn't. The production brought in hundreds of real tarantulas. The spider wrangler explained they were relatively harmless. Their venom wasn't dangerous to humans, and they'd been well fed, so they wouldn't bite. This did not comfort Molina, who was actively trying not to panic while covered in living spiders. Spielberg needed Molina to look genuinely terrified. He got that performance without any acting required. Every scream, every frantic movement, every moment of panic you see on screen is Molina's real reaction to being covered in his worst nightmare. The director called cut, and Molina stood frozen, afraid to move, while crew members carefully removed spiders from his body. Years later, Molina said the tarantula scene traumatized him more than anything else in his entire career, including playing Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man 2. His first day on a film set involved being buried in live spiders while Harrison Ford watched. Fact number 1, the film's title changed 3 times and Lucas hated all of them. The movie we know as Raiders of the Lost Ark wasn't supposed to be called that. George Lucas's original title was Indiana Smith and the Lost Ark of the Covenant. Spielberg hated it. He thought Smith was too generic, too forgettable, and made the character sound like a tax accountant instead of an adventurer. They compromised on Indiana Jones, using Lucas's dog's name for the character's first name, but the full title remained a problem. Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark of the Covenant was too long for movie marquees. Theaters would have to abbreviate it, which meant losing control of the branding. The studio pushed for just Raiders of the Lost Ark, dropping Indiana Jones entirely from the title. Lucas fought this hard, arguing that the character's name needed to be front and center for franchise potential. The studio insisted short titles sold better. They went back and forth for months. Raiders of the Lost Ark won. The film was released without Indiana Jones in the title, which is why it's the only movie in the franchise that doesn't start with Indiana Jones, and Lucas was furious and later admitted he felt like he'd lost an important battle. Here's the irony. The title Lucas hated became iconic, specifically because it was different. When the sequels came out with Indiana Jones and, in the titles, it made Raiders feel special, distinct, the original article. The naming convention Lucas fought against accidentally created franchise identity through contrast. And there you have it. 15 wild, weird facts about the movie that turned archaeology into the coolest profession on Earth and made fedoras a lifestyle choice for an entire generation. The film that almost starred someone else, almost collapsed from heat and illness, almost lost its iconic opening to late-stage rewrites, and almost had a completely different title, became one of the most influential adventure films ever made. Which fact shocked you most? Did you know about the Star Wars Easter eggs? Drop your answers in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of cinema's greatest adventures, smash that like button and subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories about the movies that shaped our childhoods. Until next time, fortune and glory.